Whenever we had dinner at my in-laws, I would fall into a bizarrely deep sleep and wake up with no memory of how I got home. My husband just laughed it off, claiming it was exhaustion. That was until I discovered a secret group chat named Project, containing photos of me unconscious, along with a message from him, week 4, on schedule. They were treating me like a project with phases and timelines, but they made one critical mistake: they chose to gaslight an auditor. Thank you so much for joining me today. Before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. What are you doing right now while you listen? Working, driving, relaxing, or maybe something else entirely? Your comments always bring such interesting perspectives to these stories. A quick heads up: some details in this story have been fictionalized to strengthen the message. What truly matters is the lesson within. The world tilted sideways at exactly 7:32 p.m., 15 minutes after I ate the soup my father-in-law personally served me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The real moment of clarity came 3 days earlier on a Friday night at 11:47 p.m., when I was still pretending everything was fine. I sat in my penthouse on the 34th floor overlooking Boston's glittering skyline, reviewing quarterly audit reports for the third time that week. At 30, I'd built a reputation as the auditor who caught what everyone else missed. The decimal point shifted 2 places right. The expense account that doubled every third month, the pattern that looked random until you mapped it across 18 months and saw the perfect sine wave of theft. Numbers don't lie, people do. Don't forget, family dinner is Saturday at 6, Thane said from the doorway, his voice carrying that casual authority I'd once found reassuring. My husband of 3 years, 35, an architect with the kind of elegant bone structure that photographs well at charity galas. You know how Dad gets when we're late. I glanced up from my laptop. I haven't missed one in 3 years, have I? No. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. You never do. After he left, I pulled up my calendar out of habit, the same compulsion that made me triple-check expense reports and verify timestamps. I scrolled backward. September, August, July. Every month, one Saturday evening blocked out in blue Whitfield family dinner. I counted them. 36 consecutive dinners, 3 years, not a single miss. Then I opened my personal journal, the one I kept for tracking my chronic exhaustion that 3 doctors had failed to diagnose. I'd been meticulous about it the way I was meticulous about everything: date, time, severity, duration, potential causes. Every entry of severe, inexplicable exhaustion fell on the same night. The night after a Whitfield family dinner. Every single one. I stared at the screen, my auditor's brain automatically calculating probabilities. 36 dinners, 36 episodes of exhaustion so profound I'd lose chunks of time, wake up in my bed with no memory of the drive home. The statistical likelihood of that being coincidence, 0.03%. How many times do you ignore your instincts before you stop calling it paranoia and start calling it evidence? I closed my laptop slowly. Across the room, Thane was already asleep, his breathing deep and even. I watched him for a long time, this man I'd married, this man whose family had welcomed me so warmly. Vernon, with his steel-gray hair and measured voice, head of the City Planning Council, always insisting I take a second helping. Celeste, with her tired eyes and elegant posture, a former chemist who'd given up her career to raise Thane, always asking if I was taking care of myself. They'd been so kind. I didn't sleep that night. Saturday evening arrived with the inevitability of an audit deadline. We pulled up to the Whitfield estate in Brookline at 5:58 p.m. Thane hated being late. The house loomed in that specifically New England way, all dark brick and ivy and inherited money. Vernon answered the door himself, 62 years old and still commanding every room he entered. Leora, come in, come in. You look tired, dear. Working too hard again. The quarter-end rush, I said, and it wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole truth. Celeste was in the kitchen, 58, but still beautiful in that careful, maintained way. She kissed my cheek, smelling of lavender, and something else I couldn't place. Chemical. Faint. Gone before I could identify it. Dinner was the usual performance. Roasted chicken root vegetables, small talk about Thane's latest project, Vernon's upcoming vote on the waterfront development, my work that I was never supposed to discuss in detail because who wants to hear about spreadsheets at dinner? Then Vernon stood walking to the sideboard, where a tureen of wild mushroom soup waited. "Special recipe tonight," he said, his voice warm with grandfatherly pride. "Celeste's been perfecting it all week." He ladled soup into my bowl, personally setting it before me with a gentle pat on my shoulder. "Eat up, Leora. You work too hard, you need your strength." I picked up my spoon. That's when I saw it. Celeste and Thane sitting across from each other. A glance. Half a second barely perceptible. But I'd spent 7 years analyzing financial discrepancies, learning to spot the micro-expressions of people lying about expense reports. I knew what coordination looked like. Her eyes flicked to him, his flicked back, the smallest nod. Then they both looked at me smiling. "It's delicious, Vernon," I said, and brought the spoon to my lips. "Thank you." The soup tasted like rosemary and betrayal. I ate it anyway. All of it. Because I needed to know. Because suspicion isn't evidence, and evidence requires documentation, and documentation requires letting the crime complete. 7:17 p.m. My hands felt distant. 7:23. The conversation sounded like it was coming through water. 7:28. Celeste's voice concerned. "Are you feeling all right, dear? You look pale." 7:32. The crystal chandelier above the Whitfield dining table began to multiply into 3, then 6 shimmering fragments. I gripped my spoon, watching my knuckles turn white against the silver handle. Across the table, Thane smiled at me with perfect loving concern. And that's when I knew. What I didn't know yet was how deep the betrayal ran, or that the evidence was waiting on Thane's iPad. I woke up in my own bed with no memory of how I got there, and 4 hours and 17 minutes missing from my life. The bedside clock read 11:49 p.m. Sunday. The dinner had been Saturday evening. I'd last checked my watch at 7:32 p.m. when the chandelier started multiplying. Now it was almost midnight, and between those two moments stretched a void where my consciousness should have been. I sat up slowly, testing my body. No soreness, no disheveled clothing. I was wearing my silk pajamas, the ones I kept in my overnight bag for emergencies. Someone had changed me. Someone had driven me home. Someone had tucked me into bed. I didn't remember any of it. Beside me, Thane slept with the peaceful breathing of the blameless. I watched the rise and fall of his chest, this man I'd shared a bed with for 3 years, and felt nothing but the cold precision of calculation. If he'd drugged me, and the evidence was mounting toward certainty, then he'd also handled my unconscious body, dressed me, transported me, all while I was completely vulnerable. The violation settled in my chest like ice. I checked my phone. No texts, no calls. The GPS history showed I'd left the Whitfield estate at 9:12 p.m., 43 minutes of blank road between Brookline and Boston, 4 hours and 17 minutes from blur to blackout to waking. This wasn't exhaustion, this was induced amnesia. Sleep was impossible. At 11:03 p.m., I slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb Thane's theatrical slumber, and padded to my home office. The Boston skyline glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows, indifferent to my unraveling marriage. I needed to think, to document, to find evidence that would hold up under scrutiny, because suspicion without documentation is just paranoia, and I'd spent 7 years learning the difference. The shared iPad sat on my desk where Thane had left it yesterday morning. He used it for architectural blueprints, and I used it for reviewing audit reports when my laptop was charging. The screen glowed with a notification. One screenshot, taken at 9:47 p.m. Saturday. I picked up the iPad with steady hands. Steady because I'd trained myself not to shake when I found discrepancies in ledgers, not to flinch when I uncovered fraud. The lock screen showed a preview of the notification, a group chat called Whitfield Project. 3 members, Thane, Vernon, Celeste. I unlocked the screen. If you've ever loved someone and discovered they documented your unconsciousness like a quarterly earnings report, you know what comes next isn't grief, it's mathematics. The group chat opened with the brutal efficiency of well-organized crime. 37 messages dating back 4 weeks. September 28th to October 26th. Not 3 years. 4 weeks. The most recent message was a photograph. Me, unconscious on the Whitfield estate sofa, head tilted back, mouth slightly open, one arm draped across my stomach. The angle was clinical, documentary. The kind of photo you take to prove a point, not to cherish a memory. The caption written by Thane at 9:47 p.m. Saturday, week 4 on schedule. Below it, Vernon had responded with a thumbs up emoji at 9:53 p.m. Celeste had written, dosage holding steady, no complications. I scrolled up. Week 3. Another photo of me unconscious, different clothes. Caption, Week 3, tolerance stable. Week 2, same. Week 1, baseline established, proceeding to phase 2. The messages blurred together, clinical and detached. Cognitive response nominal. Memory gaps consistent with projection. Recommend increasing interval next month. They were discussing me like I was a pharmaceutical trial. Number. Worse. They were discussing me like I was a project with phases and timelines and deliverables. The Whitfield project, not their daughter-in-law, not Thane's wife, a project. I kept scrolling, looking for the why. The messages were carefully worded. No explicit mention of the endgame, nothing that would constitute a confession if discovered. But the pattern was clear. 4 weeks of monthly dinners. 4 weeks of documentation. Week 4 meant this had started a month ago, not 3 years ago. But I'd been exhausted after every dinner for 3 years, which meant the Whitfield project wasn't new. It was just newly documented. Week 4, not dinner 36, week 4. Something had changed a month ago. Some new phase, some escalation that required this level of coordination and record-keeping. I searched the messages for clues, but found only the kind of careful language people use when they know their communications might be subpoenaed. Leora, are you still awake? Thane's voice drifted from the bedroom, sleep rough and concerned. Come to bed. I closed the chat with hands that had finally started shaking. Just finishing some work, I called back and was proud of how normal I sounded. I'll be there soon. Don't work too late, you need rest. Rest. As if I'd been tired. As if I hadn't been chemically sedated and photographed like evidence. I heard him shift in bed, settling back into sleep. The man who'd captioned a photo of my unconscious body with clinical efficiency. The man who'd smiled at me with perfect concern as the world tilted sideways. I took a screenshot of the group chat evidence of the evidence, then cleared the notification history so Thane wouldn't know I'd seen it. I placed the iPad exactly where he'd left it down to the millimeter. Thane was particular about his things. He'd notice if the angle was wrong. Then I walked to my office laptop and opened a new spreadsheet. Column A date, column B dinner, column C hours lost, column D evidence. If they wanted to treat me like an audit, I would audit them back. I would document every inconsistency, trace every discrepancy, follow every thread, until I understood exactly what the Whitfield project was designed to accomplish. Because whatever they were planning, they'd made one critical mistake. They'd chosen to gaslight an auditor. And auditors always find what they're looking for. The number that changed everything was $43 million. I found it on the third night of what I'd started calling my counter-investigation, buried in the kind of trust structure designed to hide assets from casual scrutiny. The Victor Whitfield Family Trust. Established 1987, primary beneficiary, Thane Whitfield dispersal conditions, outlined in subsection 7.3b. I'd spent the week auditing my husband's family the way I'd audit a suspected fraud case. Public records, property transfers, shell companies with registered agents in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. The Whitfield family wealth wasn't just old money. It was deliberately obscured money layered through enough corporate structures to make even a forensic accountant dizzy. But I was a very good forensic accountant. The trust documents were publicly filed, but written in the kind of legal language that assumes nobody will read past page 12. I read all 47 pages, twice. Subsection 7.3b, paragraph 4. Primary beneficiary shall receive full trust dispersal upon reaching age 35, provided beneficiary maintains a legally valid marriage for a minimum period of 5 consecutive years. Failure to meet this condition shall result in trust reversion to the Whitfield Estate Charitable Foundation. Thane had turned 35 6 months after we married. We'd been married 3 years and 2 months, which meant they needed me alive, married, and compliant for exactly 1 year and 10 more months. Not forever, not even a decade. Just long enough to unlock the money. The math was elegant in its cruelty. Monthly dinners for 36 months to establish the pattern, induced amnesia to keep me docile and confused. Week 4 documentation suggested they'd recently entered some new phase of the project, maybe increasing dosage, maybe testing long-term effects, maybe just keeping meticulous records in case I ever became a legal problem. I sat in my office on the 14th floor of a Boston financial district high-rise staring at that subsection until the words blurred. Outside my window, the city glittered with the false promise of order. "You've been here every night this week." The voice made me flinch. Paloma Castillo stood in my doorway, 30 years old, and the closest thing I had to a friend in this building. We'd started as junior auditors together 5 years ago. She was the only person who understood why I triple-checked expense reports and why I kept a separate spreadsheet for tracking my own billable hours. "Is everything okay?" I closed the browser window with the trust documents and pulled up a generic client file. "Just a complicated case, lots of shell companies to untangle." "Well, don't let them grind you down." She smiled, but her dark eyes were worried. "Coffee tomorrow. Coffee tomorrow." I agreed and waited until her footsteps faded before I reopened the trust documents. Auditing someone you love is like performing surgery on yourself. You need a steady hand and the ability to ignore the pain. I spent another week building my case. Documentation, screenshots, financial trails. I worked late every night, told Thane I was drowning in quarter-end audits. He believed me. Why wouldn't he? I'd always been dedicated to my work. Obsessive, even. It never occurred to him that I might be obsessive enough to audit him. 3 weeks after discovering the trust, the calendar turned to the next monthly dinner. Saturday, late October. I arrived at the Whitfield estate at 4:15 p.m., 2 hours early. Celeste opened the door looking surprised and pleased. "Leora, you're early. Thane's not here yet, he had to pick up wine." "I know. I thought I'd offer to help with dinner." I smiled the way I'd been smiling at her for 3 years, warm and daughterly. "You do so much for these dinners. Let me actually be useful for once." Her face softened. "That's sweet of you, dear. Come in, come in. I'm just starting the soup." I followed her toward the kitchen, hanging back as she pushed through the swinging door. I'd studied the estate's layout during my investigation. The kitchen door had a small glass window at eye level, original to the 1920s construction, probably for servants to check before entering. I stopped outside that door and looked through the window. Thane stood by the Wolf Range, the one Celeste bragged cost more than my first car. In his right hand, he held a small, opaque white vial, pharmaceutical-grade plastic with a dropper cap. The soup pot simmered on the burner behind him. Celeste stood beside him, reading from her phone, her lips moving silently. Thane positioned the dropper over the pot, tilted it. 1 drop fell into the soup. 2, 3, 4. He stopped, capped the vial, slipped it into his pocket. 4 drops, not 5. Celeste said, her voice muffled by the door but clear enough. "We need to maintain the baseline. The same dosage as last month." Thane stirred the pot with a wooden spoon, distributing the contamination evenly. "Exactly the same. Consistency is critical." Not spices, not herbs, not some exotic seasoning Vernon had discovered at a specialty market. Poison. Measured with pharmaceutical precision. Administered by my husband. Supervised by his mother. The former chemist reading instructions from her phone like a recipe. He counted the drops like I count line items in a balance sheet. The kitchen door swung open. I jerked back, plastering on a smile as Celeste emerged. "Oh, I was just about to come in," I said. "Actually, dear, why don't you set the table? The good china is in the dining room sideboard. I've got the soup under control." Of course. I walked to the dining room on legs that felt mechanical. Set out plates and crystal glasses with hands that didn't shake because I wouldn't let them. Vernon arrived home from his council meeting. Thane returned with 2 bottles of Cabernet. At 6 p.m. we sat down to dinner. Vernon ladled the soup into my bowl, warm and grandfatherly as ever. I ate it, all of it, because I couldn't let them know I'd seen. Couldn't reveal my hand before I understood the full scope of what they'd planned. Couldn't break the pattern without evidence that would stand up in court. So I swallowed their poison and smiled and made conversation about my latest audit project. And at 7:32 p.m., right on schedule, the chandelier began to multiply. That night, I lay in bed with my eyes closed and my mind racing, metabolizing their poison while pretending to sleep. At 3:07 a.m., Thane's side of the bed went cold. I kept my breathing steady, deep, and even, like genuine sleep. Through barely cracked eyelids, I watched his silhouette rise and pad silently toward the hallway. The bedroom door clicked shut with the careful precision of someone trying not to wake a sleeping spouse. Our bedroom mirror, angled just right on the dresser, caught the hallway through the gap beneath the door. I'd positioned it that way 2 years ago to check my appearance before leaving for work. Now it showed me my husband standing in the dim glow of his phone screen, thumbs moving across the keyboard, with the focused intensity he usually reserved for blueprints. He typed for 53 seconds, I counted. The phone's blue light painted his face in shadows I didn't recognize. When he slipped back into bed at 3:09 a.m., I was ready with my performance. "Everything okay?" I murmured, sleep thick and convincing. "Can't sleep. Just checking some project deadlines." He kissed my temple, his lips warm against my skin. "Go back to sleep." I did not go back to sleep. At 7:15 a.m., while Thane showered and sang off-key like he did every Sunday morning, I sat at my laptop with his phone backed up to our shared cloud account. Most people don't realize that family data plans automatically sync metadata even when messages are encrypted. They see the privacy settings and assume they're invisible. Auditors know better. The message sent at 3:08 a.m. showed an encrypted signal protocol, but the recipient number was visible in the routing data. I ran it through a reverse lookup service I'd used for tracing shell company officers. The device was registered to E. Harrington. Eleanor Harrington didn't exist in any database I could access. No social media, no property records, no employment history. The registration address was a UPS store in Cambridge. But the payment method for the phone plan traced back to a business account I recognized: Whitfield Estate Management, LLC. Celeste was the sole signatory. E. Harrington was Celeste. I pulled the encrypted message fragment from the backup cache, not the full text, but enough metadata to reconstruct the subject line and first sentence. Subject: Protocol Adjustment. Week 5, Preparation. Body Preview. Adjust post-exposure protocol. She noticed the kitchen timing. Next cycle increase interval by 48 hours to. The rest was locked behind encryption I couldn't crack without more sophisticated tools. She noticed the kitchen timing. I closed the laptop as the shower shut off. Thane emerged in a towel, smiling at me with the easy warmth of a husband who just poisoned his wife and then reported her awareness to his handler. You think you know someone because you've seen them sleep for 3 years? But sleep is just another performance when the person next to you has 2 lives. "Coffee?" he asked. "I'll make it," I said and smiled back. Sunday afternoon, I locked myself in my home office with the excuse of preparing for Monday's client presentation. Instead, I forensically examined every pixel of every photo in the Whitfield Project group chat. 7 years of auditing had taught me that evidence hides in margins and footnotes. The photos showed me unconscious on the estate sofa, but I wasn't looking at myself anymore. I was looking at everything else. Photo from week 1, Celeste's hand visible in the corner, checking my pulse like a nurse. Photo from week 2, Vernon's reading glasses on the side table folded neatly. Photo from week 3. Nothing unusual. Just me, sprawled and vulnerable. Photo from week 4. The most recent one, taken the night I'd witnessed Thane measuring poison. I zoomed in on the bottom right corner. A man's hand rested on the sofa's armrest. The angle was deliberate, positioned to be visible but not obvious. On the third finger, a distinctive ring caught the lamplight, square-cut black onyx set in silver with the Whitfield family crest engraved on the band. Vernon's ring. I'd seen it at every city council function, every family dinner, every formal event for 3 years. He wore it like other men wore wedding bands. Except Vernon hadn't been at the estate that night. I pulled up the Boston City Council meeting minutes. October 26th, emergency zoning session for the waterfront development dispute. Start time 6 p.m. End time 10:47 p.m. Councilman Vernon Whitfield was listed as present for the entire session with recorded votes at 7:15, 8:30, and 9:45 p.m. The photo of me unconscious was timestamped 9:47 p.m. Vernon had been in a public government meeting, documented and witnessed, while someone wearing his signature ring positioned their hand in a photograph of his unconscious daughter-in-law. Thane had borrowed the ring. Thane had staged the shot. If I ever reported these photos to police, to lawyers, to anyone, Vernon's ring would make him the obvious suspect. The city councilman with power and connections. The patriarch who'd always been so insistent about monthly family dinners. The alibi could be questioned, dismissed as bureaucratic confusion. Meeting minutes could be challenged. But a photograph doesn't lie. Except this one did, deliberately and architecturally, with my husband's hand disguised as his father's. Not a family, a law firm with blood relations. I zoomed in further, examining the hand's bone structure, the width of the fingers, the subtle differences between a 62-year-old's hand and a 35-year-old's. Thane's hands were smoother, the knuckles less pronounced. But in a photograph blurred by distance and strategic focus, it would pass. It would absolutely pass. Vernon was the emergency exit, the structural scapegoat, the person who'd take the fall if their perfect plan cracked under pressure. And he probably had no idea. If Thane could sacrifice his own father to protect the plan, then nobody in my life was safe. Which meant I needed to stop trusting people and start trusting systems. The surveillance equipment arrived in 3 separate Amazon packages over 4 days, so the algorithms wouldn't flag a pattern. Package 1, wireless security camera disguised as a desk pen, advertised for monitoring elderly parents. Package 2, voice-activated audio recorder embedded in a leather portfolio folder marketed to journalists. Package 3, a burner laptop with cash purchase components, no serial numbers linking back to my accounts. I assembled everything in the bathroom with the door locked, running the shower for white noise cover. "Leora, you've been in there a while," Thane called through the door. "Everything okay?" "Just dealing with a headache," I said, my hands steady as I configured the camera's wireless transmission. "I'll be out soon. Want me to get you some aspirin?" "I've got some, thanks." I heard his footsteps retreat. The man who'd measured poison into my dinner with pharmaceutical precision, now playing concerned husband through a bathroom door. The camera pen worked perfectly, 1080p resolution, 60-degree field of view, 16 hours of battery life. The audio recorder captured voices at 30 feet with noise cancellation filters. But hardware was only half the equation. I needed redundancy, insurance against insurance. On the burner laptop, I built an encrypted relay server, using an offshore hosting service, registered under a shell company I'd traced during a client audit 2 years ago. The company had dissolved, but the hosting account remained active, billing to an abandoned corporate credit card that still had a $20,000 limit. Every piece of footage captured by my devices would automatically upload to the relay server in real time. If the camera was destroyed, confiscated, or corrupted, the evidence would already be replicated across 3 encrypted backup addresses, one in Iceland, one in Switzerland, one in a blockchain distributed storage network that couldn't be deleted by any single entity. I tested the system 17 times, recorded myself speaking, moved the camera, checked transmission latency. Average upload delay 2.3 seconds, acceptable. This wasn't just evidence gathering. This was building my own scapegoat insurance against a family that thought in contingencies and sacrificial chess pieces. Building a case against your own family is like auditing a company that's also auditing you. Whoever finishes their paperwork first wins. 2 days before the decisive dinner I'd been planning, I walked into my firm's file storage room on the 3rd floor with a leather portfolio and a casual smile. The excuse was routine reviewing old client documentation for a compliance check. Standard procedure. Nobody questioned it. The Whitfield Commercial Properties file was exactly where it should be filed, under W, cross-referenced under my signature authority code. I'd personally audited this property development company 2 years ago. 4 weeks of verification, site visits, documentation review. The tax deduction I'd approved was for legitimate construction expenses, labor materials permits. I opened the file. The numbers stared back at me like an accusation. Original deduction I'd authorized $4.3 million. Current file amount $8.7 million. My signature sat at the bottom of the approval form, dated correctly, notarized correctly. But the calculations above it had been altered. Line items I'd never seen. Expense categories I'd never approved. Someone had modified the digital file after my signature date, changing authorized deductions into fraudulent ones, making me the auditor of record for corporate tax evasion. The federal penalty for signing off on false tax documents wasn't just license revocation, it was criminal liability, fines in the millions, prison time measured in years. My hands didn't shake as I photographed every page with my phone. Steady documentation. Evidence of the evidence being falsified. "Paloma, how long have you been standing there?" She stood 15 feet away in the corner of the storage room, partially obscured by filing cabinets. Her face was pale, eyes wide, but deliberately avoiding mine. She'd been watching me find this. I was looking for the Henderson files, she said, but her voice was wrong. Too tight, too rehearsed. The Henderson files are on the 5th floor, I said quietly. Client files are alphabetical by floor, you know that. She swallowed, looked at the floor. How much did they pay you? I asked, not angry, just calculating, trying to understand the full architecture of my own destruction. I don't know what you're… Paloma, please. I held up the forged file. I just discovered someone modified a file I signed to frame me for $8.7 million in tax fraud. And you, my closest colleague, happen to be standing in a storage room you have no business being in exactly when I make that discovery. So I'm asking, how much did they pay you? $8.7 million. My signature, my license, my prison sentence. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't answer. Didn't deny it. Didn't explain. Just stood there pale and guilty and silent. Did you forge the numbers yourself, or did someone give you access to do it? I kept my voice level, professional. An auditor asking clarifying questions. I'm trying to understand the timeline. When did they approach you? Was it before or after I married Thane? I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. Then she turned and walked out of the storage room without another word, her footsteps too quick, too deliberate. I looked down at the forged audit file in my hands and understood three things simultaneously. They were framing me for federal tax evasion. Paloma knew about it, and this storage room, like every other room in my life, was no longer safe. The only person I'd trusted at work had been compromised, probably for months, possibly for years. How many other files had she accessed with my credentials? How many other traps had been set while I smiled at her over morning coffee? The decisive dinner was in 48 hours, and I had just discovered I was walking into it with a target already painted on my back. 48 hours. That's how long I had to prepare after discovering Paloma's betrayal. Long enough to test my equipment one final time. Not long enough to stop being terrified. I walked through the doors of the Whitfield estate, carrying two weapons, a leather file folder with an embedded audio recorder, and the knowledge that everyone inside wanted to destroy me. The folder went onto the entry hall console table, positioned naturally among Celeste's gardening magazines and Vernon's city council briefings. The camera pen, disguised as an expensive Mont Blanc I'd received as a work gift, clipped into my jacket pocket, at chest-height perfect angle for capturing faces and documents. In the dining room, I set my folder on the chair, back the recording device, now active, picking up every conversation within 30 feet. Leora, Vernon's voice boomed with grandfatherly warmth. Right on time as always. Come, I want you to meet someone. A man stood beside the fireplace, 42 or 43, with a military buzz cut, and the kind of expensive casual wear that screamed new money trying to look old. His eyes traveled down my body with the slow assessment of someone pricing livestock. Bryce, this is my daughter-in-law, Leora, Vernon said. She's a senior auditor, brilliant with numbers. Is that right? Bryce Riddle extended his hand, holding mine 3 seconds too long. I've always appreciated women who understand complex transactions. I smiled the way I'd learned to smile at inappropriate clients. Professional, distant. Commercial development, Vernon mentioned, among other things. His thumb brushed across my knuckles before releasing. Vernon and I go back 20 years. We've built quite the empire together. Across the room, Donovan Whitfield sat in the corner armchair, 28 years old and radiating discomfort, like heat. Thane's younger brother checked his phone every 30 seconds, his expensive watch catching the light each time. He'd barely acknowledged my arrival, hadn't made eye contact with anyone. He knew something. The body language screamed it, hunched shoulders, restless fingers, eyes that tracked movement without engaging. Not the confident complicity of Vernon or Thane. This was guilt, or fear. Dinner progressed with choreographed normalcy. Celeste served roasted chicken. Vernon carved. Thane discussed his latest architectural project. I made appropriate comments, laughed at appropriate moments, and watched everyone watching me. Vernon personally poured my wine, a Bordeaux that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Leora, you look tense, he said, filling my glass. Have some wine, it'll help you relax. I raised it to my lips. tilted the glass, felt the wine touch my mouth without swallowing a single drop. When I set it down, the level had barely changed. There's a specific kind of terror that comes from watching someone pour poison into your glass while smiling at you like they love you. The soup arrived at 7 p.m. Wild mushroom Vernon's specialty. He ladled it into my bowl with the same grandfatherly pride I'd seen 3 dozen times before. I ate it, every spoonful, because the camera was recording, because the audio was capturing, because evidence required completion and I needed them to think nothing had changed. At 7:15 p.m., I let my spoon clatter against the bowl. "I'm sorry," I said, pressing my fingers to my temple. "I feel dizzy." Thane was on his feet immediately, the perfect concerned husband. "Leora, what's wrong?" "Just give me a moment." I let my eyes unfocus, let my body sag against the chair. "Let's get you to the sofa." His hands were gentle as he guided me to the living room, laying me down with careful attention. "You've been working too hard. All those late nights." I let my eyelids fall to slits barely open, watching the room through my lashes. Thane returned to the dining room. Through the archway, I watched Vernon catch Bryce's eye and wink. Deliberate, triumphant. Bryce smiled back, predatory and satisfied. "How long?" Donovan's voice tight with anxiety, barely above a whisper. 20 minutes, maybe 30, Celeste answered, her tone clinical. "The dosage is precise. When will it be finished?" Donovan stood now, phone clutched in his hand like a lifeline. "I can't, this isn't what you said it would be." "Sit down, Donovan." Vernon's voice carried command that made even me flinch. "You're in this as deep as the rest of us." "But she's just lying there and he's long enough for Bryce to sign the contracts," Celeste said, cold and matter-of-fact. "That's all that matters. 47 million doesn't materialize without insurance. Long enough for Bryce to sign." The words hit like ice water. This wasn't just about the 5-year inheritance clause. They were using me, my unconscious body, my vulnerability as leverage, as collateral, as proof to Bryce Riddle that the Whitfield family could be trusted to handle what? What kind of business deal required a drugged woman as demonstration? "She's out," Thane said. "I'll take her to the guest room." "Leave her," Bryce said. His footsteps approached the sofa. "Vernon and I need to discuss the land transfer terms. She's fine where she is." I felt his shadow fall across my body before I smelled his cologne, expensive, cloying, invasive. He stood close enough that I could hear his breathing. "Beautiful wife you've got, Thane," Bryce said, very compliant. Thane laughed, actually laughed. "She's perfect for what we need." "The others were too," Bryce started, then stopped. "The others." I lay perfectly still on that living room sofa, hearing their footsteps, smelling Bryce Riddle's cologne as he moved closer. Through my lashes, I could see his shadow falling across my body. And one thought crystallized with perfect, terrible clarity: how many women before me had lain in this exact spot? I didn't have time to answer that question, because the audio recorder in my file folder 30 feet away in the dining room was capturing every word from Vernon's office through the open connecting door. $47 million for the Mercer Ridge commercial parcels contingent on your signature by Monday. Vernon's voice, clear and businesslike, discussing real estate like he'd discussed my unconsciousness. "The parcels are worth 60, Bryce said. "You're asking for a $13 million discount." "I'm offering you a $13 million opportunity." Vernon's chair creaked. "The zoning variance goes through Thursday. After that, those lots are commercial gold. You sign Monday, you're buying at residential prices. Assuming the variance passes." "It will pass. I have 4 votes locked." Silence. Then Bryce's voice lower. "Before I sign anything worth 47 million, I need additional conditions met." "We discussed this," Vernon carefully neutral. "Everything's arranged. I want confirmation in person." Footsteps. A door opening. Then Thane's voice, cold and transactional as architectural specifications. "She's in the living room. You have 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Allocated to my destruction with the same bureaucratic efficiency Vernon used for zoning board presentations. Time-boxed, scheduled, optimized for maximum return on investment. "And if she wakes up?" Bryce asked. "She won't," Celeste's voice clinical. "The dosage is calibrated for 90 minutes minimum." "But if she does?" "Then you improvise," Thane said. "Or you don't sign, your choice." The recorder timestamp burned in my mind: 7:47 p.m., which meant I had until 8:17 p.m. before they expected Bryce to return. 30 minutes during which I was supposed to lie unconscious, while a man who'd paid his compliance with a land deal used my body as the down payment. I wasn't collateral damage. I was the negotiated price. Footsteps approached the living room. I kept my breathing deep and even my body limp. Bryce entered at exactly 8 p.m. I heard his shoes on the hardwood, smelled his cologne intensifying as he moved closer. His shadow fell across my face. His hand reached for my shoulder. I exploded upward and drove my heel into his groin with every ounce of strength I'd built, carrying audit boxes up 4 flights of stairs when the elevator broke. He went down hard, a strangled sound tearing from his throat. I ran. The front entrance was 15 feet away. I grabbed the doorknob, yanked. Deadbolted. The key slot was empty, someone had removed it entirely. Behind me, Bryce was trying to get to his knees, his face purple with rage and pain. "You little—" I pivoted, sprinted down the hallway toward the emergency exit. The estate had been built in the 1920s with fire safety exits mandated by updated building codes. I'd seen the inspection certificates framed in Vernon's study. The emergency door had to open from inside. Building code required it. I hit the push bar at full speed. The door opened 3 inches and stopped. Something was holding it from the outside. No, someone. I yanked harder, putting my shoulder into it, and through the gap I saw hands. White-knuckled, trembling. Women's hands with manicured nails and age spots and a wedding ring I'd seen for 3 years. "Celeste!" I screamed through the crack. "Open the door!" Her face appeared in the narrow opening. Tears streamed down her cheeks, running into the collar of her silk blouse. Her eyes were red and swollen, but she wouldn't look at me directly. "I can't," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, I can't." "You have to, he's coming. I can't let you leave." Her voice broke. "If you leave, everything falls apart. Vernon, the house, Thane's future, everything we built. You built it on drugging women." I was pulling with both hands, now my feet braced against the doorframe. "How many before me, Celeste? How many women have you cried for while holding this door?" She cried and still held the door. Behind me, Bryce's footsteps were getting closer, uneven but determined. "Please," I begged. "Celeste, please. I'm sorry." She was sobbing openly now, her whole body shaking, but her grip on that doorknob never loosened. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She wasn't holding it to keep me in, I realized with sudden terrible clarity. She was holding it because letting go, admitting what she'd become, facing what she'd allowed to happen in her own home would have killed her. The door was her anchor, the only thing keeping her from drowning in the horror of her own complicity. Thane appeared at the end of the hallway, his face a mask I didn't recognize. Not angry, not concerned, just empty. "Let go of the door," he said to me, calm, reasonable. "We need to talk." Talk. I was still pulling, still fighting. "Your mother is holding me prisoner, while your business partner—" Bryce got overeager. "That's not how this was supposed to go." He moved closer, hands raised like he was approaching a frightened animal. "Come back to the drawing room. Vernon wants to discuss a resolution." "A resolution? $15 million. Clean transfer. You sign the NDA, take the money, and this never happened. 15 million. Not the full trust amount, not even half. Just enough to make me complicit in my own silence. Trapped between a corrupt billionaire in front of me and my weeping mother-in-law locking the exit behind me, I realized survival was no longer about strategy, it was about brute force. I had nowhere to run and no one to trust. Then Vernon Whitfield's voice cut through the chaos like a gavel. "Everyone, drawing room, now." It wasn't a suggestion. Bryce straightened, still favoring his left side where my heel had connected. Thane moved aside, creating a path. Celeste released the emergency door from outside and entered through the front, her face red and swollen from crying. We walked to the drawing room in a procession that felt like a funeral march. Vernon stood behind his mahogany desk, the one his grandfather had imported from England in 1947. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held first editions worth more than most people's houses. The room smelled like leather and old money and calculated control. "Bryce, wait in your car," Vernon said. "This is family business." Bryce looked at me with eyes that promised this wasn't over, then left. The door clicked shut. Vernon opened a folder on his desk, cream-colored linen paper embossed Whitfield Family Trust letterhead. $15 million. He said, his voice businesslike and calm. "Private, irrevocable trust in your name only, plus the deed to the Beacon Hill condo, free and clear, current market value, $2.3 million. All you do is sign a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement and cooperate with the family's business arrangements for the remaining 2 years of your marriage to Thane. Cooperate. The word hung in the air like poison. After which, he continued, you receive the full trust dispersal at the 5-year mark, file for divorce if you wish, and walk away with more money than you'd earn in 3 lifetimes as an auditor. I looked at the number written on the trust document. 15 million, tax-free he'd specified. They'd calculated the price of my silence down to the dollar. I turned to Thane. He stood beside his father's desk, in a united front, hands in his pockets, face carefully neutral. The man I'd married. The man who'd measured poison into my soup with pharmaceutical precision. The man who'd allocated 30 minutes of my violation to close a land deal. Do you have anything more to say to me, Thane? The question hung between us. 1 second. 2. 3. He looked at his shoes. Italian leather, custom-made, paid for with family money, built on generations of calculated cruelty. 4 seconds. 5. 6. I watched his throat work like he was trying to form words. 7. 8. He said nothing, just stood there staring at the floor while his father offered to buy my dignity, and his mother cried silently in the corner. That silence told me everything I'd needed to know for 3 years. If someone you loved offered you $15 million to forget they sold you, would the number matter? Or would the fact that they calculated your silence had a price be the thing that broke you? I need to think, I said, my voice steady. This is a lot. Vernon smiled. Of course, take the night. We'll reconvene tomorrow afternoon. I should go. I picked up my handbag from the chair where I'd set it when we entered, feeling its familiar weight. I need air. Not yet, Vernon's voice sharpened. First we address the elephant in the room. He walked past me into the living room. I followed, dread pooling in my stomach. Vernon scanned the space where I'd lain, feigning unconsciousness. His eyes tracked across surfaces, angles, potential surveillance positions. He'd spent 40 years in city planning. He understood sightlines, coverage zones, optimal recording positions. He went straight to the bookshelf. The camera pen sat exactly where I'd planted it, clipped to the third shelf between a leather-bound Dickens collection and Vernon's city council commendations. He picked it up slowly, holding it to the light. Looking for something, Leora? He turned the pen over, examining the lens. Found your little insurance policy. My heart hammered, but I kept my face neutral. Shocked. Caught. I don't... Please. He walked to the marble fireplace. Did you really think we wouldn't check? Thane and Celeste entered the living room, forming a triangle around me. 3 years we've done this, Vernon continued. 3 years of monthly dinners. You think you're the first person who got suspicious, the first one who tried to gather evidence. He raised the pen above his head and smashed it against the marble hearth. Plastic shattered, circuit boards scattered. The lens cracked into crystalline fragments. Vernon looked directly into the broken camera and smiled, held the destroyed device up like a trophy. Thane moved beside his father, staring down at the wreckage. He smiled, too. Celeste joined them, her tear-stained face transforming into something smug and relieved. All 3 of them posed in front of the destroyed camera like they were taking a family portrait. They smiled at the broken camera like it was a mirror. It's over, Vernon said, still holding the shattered pen. No evidence, no recording, no proof. Just a stressed-out auditor who had too much wine at dinner and imagined things. Sign the agreement, Thane added. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. I adjusted my handbag strap slightly, feeling the weight of the real camera inside the backup pen I'd clipped to the interior pocket before leaving home, the one that had been streaming to my encrypted relay server since I'd walked through their door. The one that had just captured Vernon finding and destroying what he thought was my only surveillance device. The one that had recorded all 3 of them smiling in smug relief, performing their victory for a camera they didn't know existed. What they didn't know yet was that their perfect footage was already uploading to my relay server, and the relay server had been programmed to forward to 3 recipients if certain trigger conditions were met. One of those recipients was the FBI Financial Crimes tip line. The first siren was distant enough that Vernon looked toward the window with only mild curiosity. By the 3rd siren, his face had gone entirely gray. Red and blue lights strobed through the drawing room windows. Car doors slammed. Footsteps thundered up the brick walkway. A voice amplified through a megaphone, FBI, open the door. If you do not comply within 30 seconds, we will breach. Vernon moved toward the foyer on autopilot, his expression cycling through shock, calculation, resignation. Thane followed, already pulling his phone from his pocket, probably to call their lawyer. Celeste stood frozen in the living room doorway, one hand pressed to her throat. I stayed exactly where I was, feeling the camera in my handbag, understanding that whatever happened next, I'd already won. The front door opened. Special Agent Simone Ramsey entered first, 46 years old, with sharp eyes that had seen 2 decades of financial crime, followed by 6 federal agents in tactical vests. Vernon Whitfield. Thane Whitfield. Bryce Riddle. You're under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, extortion, and drugging with intent to commit sexual assault. Simone's voice was professional, efficient, devastating. You have the right to remain silent. Handcuffs clicked onto Vernon's wrists. Then Thane's. 2 agents moved toward the kitchen where Bryce had fled, dragging him back 30 seconds later. Who called in the tip? Simone asked, scanning the room. Donovan stepped forward from the corner where he'd been watching everything unfold. His phone was still in his handscreen lit. He looked at his father and brother being processed for arrest, and the smallest smile touched his lips before he smoothed it into concern. I only did the right thing, Agent, he said, his voice steady and righteous. I couldn't let this continue, but I saw the truth in his eyes. The way they tracked Vernon and Thane, being led towards separate FBI vehicles. The satisfaction he couldn't quite conceal behind his concerned citizen mask. The relaxation in shoulders that had been tense and anxious all evening. Donovan hadn't called the FBI to save me. He'd called to eliminate Thane from the inheritance line. Watching Vernon sacrifice himself to save Thane was like watching someone jump on a grenade they'd pulled the pin on themselves. Ma'am, Simone approached me with professional gentleness. Are you Leora Whitfield? We need you to come with us to give a statement. I nodded, unable to speak, and let her guide me to an unmarked sedan. 11 p.m., FBI Financial Crimes Unit headquarters, downtown Boston. I'd been in an interview room for 2 hours, walking Simone through everything, the dinners, the patterns, the drugging, the business deals, the surveillance footage. She returned from a consultation with her supervisor looking frustrated. Your father-in-law has confessed, she said, sliding a document across the table. Full confession. Wire fraud, extortion, conspiracy to commit sexual assault, everything. He says he masterminded the entire operation and that Thane had no knowledge of any criminal activity. I stared at the confession. Vernon's signature at the bottom, neat and controlled. His lawyer arrived before you raided the house, I said slowly. Simone's jaw tightened. 7 minutes before our units even left this building, the confession was typed, printed, and ready to sign when we brought him in. Pre-planned, rehearsed, coordinated. Vernon was falling on the sword to shield his son, preserving Thane's legal innocence so he could still access the trust. But I have footage. We have the footage. It's excellent evidence against Vernon. Against Thane. She shook her head. A good defense attorney will argue he was following his father's instructions, didn't understand the full scope, wasn't present for key discussions. Clause 7.3b, criminal conviction, $0, charity. Vernon had calculated this too. His sacrifice wasn't noble, it was strategic. One Whitfield goes to prison, the other inherits everything. 2 a.m. The FBI had set me up in a hotel room downtown for protection while they processed the arrests. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, unable to sleep, my phone charging on the nightstand. It buzzed. An email. Encrypted sender. No subject line. I opened it with hands that wanted to shake. The message was brief. You did the right thing tonight. But Thane isn't finished. Check Clause 7.3b in the Victor Whitfield Family Trust. And don't trust Paloma Castillo. Attached a PDF. Victor Whitfield's will professionally scanned with one section highlighted in yellow. Clause 7.3b. In the event that the primary beneficiary is convicted of any criminal offense carrying a sentence exceeding 1 year of imprisonment, all trust assets shall be immediately transferred in their entirety to the charitable organizations listed in Schedule C. No family member, spouse, or descendant shall receive any portion of said assets under any circumstances. I read it 3 times. If Thane was convicted, nobody got the money. Not Vernon, not Celeste, not Donovan. The entire fortune went to charity. Which explained why Vernon confessed to everything. Which explained why Thane needed to stay legally clean. Which explained why their lawyer had been ready before the FBI even arrived. I scrolled back to the email sender. Encrypted routing through multiple servers. Untraceable without forensic tools I didn't have access to. The warning about Paloma sat there like a stone in my chest. I hadn't told anyone about Paloma's betrayal in the file storage room. I'd barely processed it myself. So how did this anonymous sender know? I sat in that dark hotel room, staring at the encrypted email on my phone screen, reading the sender's warning about Paloma for the fourth time. Someone out there, someone who knew the exact clause number in a 50-page trust document. Someone who knew Paloma had betrayed me before I'd told anyone was watching, helping. And I had absolutely no idea who they were or why. I spent Sunday in that hotel room trying to trace the ghost's email through every digital tool I had access to, hitting encryption walls I couldn't break. By Monday morning, I still had no answers about my anonymous ally, but I was about to get devastating clarity about my enemy. Simone Ramsey slid a manila folder across the coffee shop table and said 5 words that rewrote everything I thought I knew: your friend has been compromised. The coffee shop was 3 blocks from my office, independent and anonymous. The kind of place where FBI agents could meet witnesses without drawing attention. I'd ordered a latte I had no intention of drinking. Simone had ordered nothing. "Which friend?" I asked, though something cold in my stomach already knew. She opened the folder. Inside, a printed photograph of me leaving the FBI building Saturday night, taken from an elevated angle. The timestamp read 9:47 p.m. "We ran forensic analysis on the metadata," Simone said. "The photo was taken from this address. Does 847 Boylston mean anything to you?" My mouth went dry. That's Paloma's building, 12th floor. Paloma Castillo, your colleague at the audit firm." Simone pulled out a second document: property records. Lease confirmed in her name since 2022. The angle of the shot matches a window facing the FBI building. I stared at the photo, remembering the ghost's warning. "Don't trust Paloma Castillo." "There's more," Simone continued. "The device used to capture this image is registered to Whitfield Commercial Properties, LLC, your husband's company. We pulled the phone records. There were 17 calls between this device and Thane Whitfield's personal cell in the 72 hours leading up to the raid. 17 calls. The coffee shop sounds: espresso machines, hissing conversations, murmuring dishes clattering became distant white noise. I forced myself to focus on the forensic timeline Simone was presenting. "How long have you known Ms. Castillo?" she asked. "Graduate school." The words came out hollow. 10 years. We started at the audit firm together 5 years ago. I stopped, had been, past tense now. She was my closest friend. Simone's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry, but we need to establish the scope of the compromise. What information did you share with her regarding your investigation? Have you ever had to mathematically calculate which parts of your life were real and which were surveillance theater performed for an audience of one?" I mentally cataloged every conversation with Paloma over the past 4 months. September. I'd told her about the exhaustion patterns after family dinners. She'd suggested I see a doctor, recommended a specialist. Had that doctor been compromised too? Early October. When I discovered the group chat on Thane's iPad, I'd mentioned to Paloma that I was dealing with some family stuff and working late. She'd offered to help with my client load. Had that been to free up my time for Thane to monitor? Mid-October. The week I built the surveillance system, I'd told Paloma I was investigating a complicated fraud case with shell companies. She'd asked detailed questions about my methodology. I'd answered, thinking I was processing my strategy out loud with a trusted colleague. The hotel. I'd texted Paloma the name when the FBI moved me Saturday night, saying I needed someone to know where I was for safety. She'd responded with concern and support. The relay server, IP address. I'd walked her through the technical architecture over coffee, proud of the redundancy I'd built. My theory about Vernon being positioned as the scapegoat, my suspicion about the forged audit signatures. Everything. I'd told her everything. "The hotel location," I said quietly, "the backup camera system, meeting times with you, the storage room where I discovered the forged files." "She was in that storage room when you found them," Simone said. "You mentioned that in your statement. I thought it was coincidence. Bad timing." I looked up at her. "It wasn't coincidence, was it?" "Ms. Castillo's building access logs show she entered the storage area 17 minutes before you did. She was waiting, either to observe your reaction or to warn Mr. Whitfield if you discovered the forgery." 17 minutes of watching me walk into a trap she'd helped set. How long has this been going on? I asked. How long has she been working with him? We're still establishing that timeline, but based on phone records, at least 18 months, possibly longer. 18 months meant before I discovered the group chat, before I even suspected anything was wrong. Thane had embedded an intelligence operative in my closest friendship, positioned her to monitor and report on every aspect of my life. Graduate school, 10 years, every coffee, every secret, every fear. There's a possibility, Simone said carefully, that we can use this to our advantage. If Ms. Castillo doesn't know we've identified her, we could feed controlled information through her back to your husband. Disinformation, I said. Counterintelligence. Make him think you're planning one thing while you do another. I sat across from Simone with my untouched latte going cold. The realization hit me like a physical blow. By trusting Paloma, I had unknowingly handed Thane a daily, detailed roadmap of my entire investigation. If I wanted to survive, my every move from this second forward had to feed that pipeline with calculated disinformation, which meant every move I made going forward had to assume Thane was 3 steps ahead, unless I could find a way to turn Paloma's access into my advantage. Which meant step 1 was figuring out who I could actually trust. 3 days later, I learned the answer was even more complicated than I'd feared. Celeste Whitfield walked into the harbor bar, looking like someone attending her own funeral, composed, dressed in black, carrying a purse heavy enough to contain either evidence or a weapon. I'd chosen the location deliberately, a waterfront dive on Atlantic Avenue that emptied out after 9 p.m., far enough from the Whitfield social circle that nobody would recognize us. Low candlelight barely illuminated scarred wooden tables. Distant jazz played through speakers that crackled with age. The air smelled like old wood, spilled beer, and 30 years of secrets. Celeste sat down across from me without a greeting. Her makeup was flawless, her posture perfect. She looked exactly like she had at every family dinner I'd attended, except for her eyes, which held something I'd never seen before. Clarity. This is everything I could copy without Vernon's knowledge, she said, sliding a compact external hard drive across the table. 15 years of financial records, shell companies' offshore accounts, trust structures, and the victim files. I picked up the drive. Solid state, encrypted, professional grade. The weight of it felt heavier than physics allowed. Victim files, I repeated. Labeled legacy cases. Vernon's filing system. Her voice was steady, clinical. Names, dates, photographs, settlement amounts, women who came before you. The jazz music seemed to get quieter, or maybe my hearing narrowed to focus entirely on Celeste's words. How many? 6 confirmed in the files I accessed. There may be more in earlier records before my time. Before her time, 30 years ago. Why are you giving this to me? I asked. Celeste looked at her hands, the same hands that had held the emergency exit door, while I begged for escape. Because 30 years ago I was you. Exactly you. The confession came without tears, without trembling, with the precise diction of someone reciting documented facts. I was 28, a research chemist at a pharmaceutical company. I met Vernon at a fundraiser. He was charming, powerful, connected. We married within a year. She paused, took a sip of wine she'd ordered, but clearly had no intention of drinking. The first dinner where I lost time was 6 weeks after the wedding. I woke up in the guest room with no memory of how I got there. It happened again the next month, and the next. I knew this story, I was living this story. I started suspecting. I confronted Vernon. He denied everything with such convincing hurt that I thought I was losing my mind. Her eyes met mine. Then a colleague, someone I trusted, someone who worked in pharmaceutical oversight, reached out. They'd noticed patterns. They offered to help me document evidence, build a case, get out safely. How many times can you choose safety over truth before you stop recognizing yourself in the mirror? I had 1 week to decide, Celeste continued. My colleague had already contacted an attorney, arranged for protective custody, prepared witness statements. All I had to do was say yes. But you didn't, I said. She shook her head, the motion barely perceptible. I was terrified of losing my reputation, of Vernon's connections destroying my career, of being labeled a hysteric who accused a respected city councilman of poisoning her. She set down the wine glass with precision, and I was exhausted. Fighting seemed impossible. Compliance seemed easier. So you stayed. I stayed. And Vernon gave me a choice: cooperate with the family business or face the consequences. I chose cooperation. The clinical tone never wavered. The first time I helped prepare a dinner for another woman, I told myself it was survival, that I was trapped, that I had no choice. When did that stop being true? Year 5, maybe 6. Somewhere in that range, I stopped being coerced and started being complicit. She looked past me toward the dark harbor visible through salt-streaked windows. I learned the chemistry. I assisted with the documentation. I held doors. 30 years. She had 30 years to choose differently. I'm not asking you to forgive me, Leora. I'm asking you not to make my mistake. She pushed the hard drive closer. That colleague who tried to help me 30 years ago, they were fired 6 months later. Character assassination, professional destruction. Vernon made sure they never worked in pharmaceuticals again. Who was it? It doesn't matter now. They're dead. Cancer 5 years ago. Celeste's voice remained absolutely steady. No tremor, no break, just clinical precision delivering the narrative of her own moral destruction. But they were right about Vernon, about the pattern, about everything. And I was too afraid to listen. I looked at the hard drive sitting between us on the scarred wooden table, then at Celeste's face, perfectly composed, makeup, flawless, the face of a woman who'd spent 3 decades perfecting the performance of normalcy. How many women, I asked, in those victim files? How many? She took a slow sip of her untouched wine, buying 3 seconds before she had to answer. 6 confirmed, possibly more before I arrived. 6 women who'd lain on that same sofa. 6 women who'd eaten soup measured to the drop. 6 women who'd been traded like currency for Vernon's business deals. And Celeste had sat in that house for 30 years knowing. I left that bar carrying 15 years of Whitfield crimes on a hard drive the size of my palm, knowing that 6 women's stories were encrypted inside. 4 days later, I learned Thane had written his own ending to this story, one I never saw coming. Simone Ramsey's call woke me at 6:14 a.m., with news that should have felt like victory. Thane Whitfield was in a serious car accident on I-90 last night. I sat up in the hotel bed, heart pounding. Is he? No body at the scene. We're checking hospitals, but if he's injured and conscious, he could be anywhere. Her voice carried professional calm with an undercurrent of urgency. Massachusetts State Police found his Tesla wrapped around the concrete median barrier near Framingham. Airbags deployed, driver's seat empty. Initial assessment suggests he exited the vehicle after impact, possibly disoriented or injured. A crash. Thane in a crash. Possibly injured, possibly dying somewhere along the highway shoulder. For 3 minutes, I let myself believe he might be dead and this might finally be over. I'm sending a unit to pick you up, Simone continued. FBI wants you at the scene. There are irregularities. Irregularities. The word that meant nothing was ever simple. By 7:30 a.m., I was standing on the shoulder of I-90 near Framingham, watching Massachusetts State Police process the crash site. The Tesla Model S sat crumpled against the concrete barrier, front end accordioned windshields spiderwebbed, both airbags deployed like white parachutes. Officer Marcus Delacroix, a state police accident reconstruction specialist with 15 years of experience and a methodical way of photographing skid marks, walked me through the initial findings. Impact occurred at approximately 11:47 p.m., he said, pointing to the barrier damage. Vehicle was traveling at 73 miles per hour based on the event data recorder. No evidence of braking before impact. No attempt to swerve. Like he didn't see it, I said. Or like he wasn't driving. Simone appeared beside us, phone pressed to her ear, then lowered it. FBI technical analysts are at the impound lot examining the vehicle's computer systems. The Tesla keeps detailed logs, every command, every autopilot engagement, every driver input. And I asked. Her expression told me everything before she spoke. The autopilot was active, but there's something wrong with the timestamp. We drove to the impound lot in Framingham, where the Tesla sat under harsh fluorescent lights, surrounded by FBI technical specialists with laptops connected to the car's diagnostic ports. One of them, a woman in her 30s with FBI crime lab credentials, looked up as we approached. The autopilot sequence was manually programmed, she said without preamble, not engaged in real time during the drive. Someone pre-programmed a route, a speed, and a terminal point. The crash location then set it to execute on a timer. When? Simone asked. 13 hours before impact, yesterday at 10:47 a.m. 13 hours before the crash, Thane had programmed his car to drive itself into a concrete barrier. Before I show you what the crash scene analysts found in that Tesla's computer, I need to know. Are you still with me? Comment. A. If you think Thane really crashed, or B. If you smell a setup and tell me in one sentence why. Quick note. What comes next includes some recreated details to convey the investigative process, but the core revelation is what matters here. Pull the highway surveillance footage, Simone ordered. Every camera between Boston and the crash site. I want to see when he exited that vehicle. It took 40 minutes. The footage showed Thane's Tesla entering I-90 westbound at 11:17 p.m. At 11:32 p.m., the vehicle pulled into a rest stop 2 kilometers before the eventual crash location. The driver's door opened. Thane Whitfield stepped out. He walked to the passenger's side, retrieved a dark duffel bag from the back seat, a bag that hadn't been visible during his FBI questioning that afternoon. He wore different clothes than he'd worn 6 hours earlier. Black jeans, dark jacket, baseball cap. An unmarked sedan with covered plates pulled into the rest stop 30 seconds later. Thane got in. The sedan drove away eastbound back toward Boston. The Tesla sat motionless in the rest stop parking lot for exactly 13 minutes. Then at 11:45 p.m., its lights came on. The vehicle pulled out of the rest stop, merged onto I-90 westbound, and accelerated to precisely 73 miles per hour. 2 minutes later, it drove directly into the concrete median barrier with no driver inside. He programmed his own death 13 hours in advance. This wasn't a crash, Simone said, her voice tight with controlled fury. This was a stage production. He planned his disappearance before we even raided the estate. I stared at the frozen surveillance image on the screen. Thane, at 11:32 p.m., entering an unmarked sedan wearing clothes I'd never seen, carrying a go bag that proved this wasn't panic, it was preparation. He knew, I said quietly. He knew I would call the FBI. He knew you would arrest him. He knew exactly how this would play out. Which means he had advance warning, Simone said. Someone told him the raid was coming. But it was worse than that. The timeline didn't add up. Thane had programmed the crash at 10:47 a.m. Tuesday, which was before the FBI had even finalized the raid warrant, which meant he hadn't been reacting to the investigation. He'd been ahead of it. The car crash was a ghost show. Thane hadn't panicked. He had executed a pre-planned escape route right under the nose of the FBI. And the only person who could have fed him that information was sitting in her apartment right now, probably already tracing my backup server's IP address through firm network logs. The encrypted email hit my phone at 2:47 p.m. with no subject line, just an attached photo that made my hands go numb. Thane entering Paloma's apartment building at 11:04 p.m. last night, 7 minutes after his staged car crash. I was sitting in my parked car outside the FBI building, waiting for Simone to finish coordinating the manhunt. The phone screen showed Thane in dark clothes, baseball cap pulled low, entering the familiar glass doors of 847 Boylston Street. The timestamp read April 23, 2017. 7 minutes after abandoning his Tesla at the rest stop, he'd gone straight to Paloma. The email had a second attachment. Audio file 43 seconds long. I plugged in earbuds with shaking hands and pressed play. Thane's voice, urgent but controlled. She has a second relay server backing up the camera footage. I need you to trace the IP address through her firm's network logs. Tonight. Paloma's voice worried. What if she notices the access attempt? She won't. She thinks you're on her side. A pause. Then Paloma again. And if I find the server location? Text me the IP and hosting provider. I'll handle the rest. Thane, if she figures out I'm helping you track her evidence. She won't figure it out. She's too busy trusting you. The recording ended. I sat frozen in the driver's seat, hands locked on the steering wheel, while Boston traffic moved past my windows like I wasn't even there. My relay server, the one piece of evidence Thane couldn't access because I'd built it on infrastructure he didn't control. The automatic backup system that had captured every second of his family's crimes. He was hunting it, right now, through Paloma. The email from the ghost had one more line below the audio file. You have approximately 6 hours before they locate your server. Move it now. 6 hours. I checked the time, 2:49 p.m., which meant by 8:49 p.m. tonight, Thane would have my server's location and the ability to destroy the only comprehensive evidence that proved his involvement. If you've ever had 6 hours to save the only evidence that stands between you and complete destruction, you know what the next 4 hours felt like. I drove to a suburban data center 20 miles west of Boston on Route 2, a nondescript building that housed server racks for hundreds of small businesses. My relay infrastructure was hosted here under a shell LLC I'd created specifically for the surveillance operation. By 3:47 p.m., I was in the climate-controlled server room, fingers flying across my laptop keyboard, manually migrating every file, every backup, every piece of encrypted footage to a completely new cloud infrastructure with a different IP address, different hosting provider, different digital fingerprint. The process was supposed to take 8 hours. I had less than 5. I worked with the focused intensity of someone defusing a bomb, watching progress bars crawl across my screen while sweat ran down my back, despite the Arctic air conditioning. Transfer protocols, encryption key rotation, DNS propagation. Every technical detail had to be perfect, or the evidence would corrupt, become inadmissible, disappear into digital void. 7:23 p.m. The final transfer protocol was executing when I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, hand already reaching for my phone to call 911. A middle-aged man stood in the server room doorway wearing a worn blazer that had seen better decades and holding a visitor badge that said IT Consultant, McCormick Systems. He was 51, maybe 52, with hollow eyes that had seen too much and the careful posture of someone who'd learned to make himself invisible. Preston Blanchard, he said, his voice quiet and precise. I worked for Vernon Whitfield from 1995 to 2010, senior financial assistant, until he destroyed my career for trying to report what I'd found. The ghost, standing 3 feet away from me in a server room, flesh and blood, and 15 years of obsessive patience. You're the person who's been sending you encrypted emails, yes. He stayed in the doorway, hands visible, non-threatening. I've been watching the Whitfield family since Vernon had me fired, gathering evidence, tracking victims, waiting for someone with both the access and the courage to actually take them down. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt a cold recognition settling in my chest. You knew about Paloma, I said. You knew she was feeding information to Thane. I've known for 18 months, since Thane first recruited her. And you didn't warn me until now. Because I needed to see if you'd figure it out yourself, if you'd survive their counterattacks, if you were strong enough to finish what I started. He stepped into the server room and I saw the visitor badge more clearly, expertly forged, probably one of dozens he'd used over the years to access building systems information. You're the first person who's gotten this far, the first one with enough evidence they can't bury. 15 years. He'd been watching them for 15 years. The first victim you discovered, I said, in 1995. Who was she? Margaret Holloway, Vernon's business partner's daughter. I found the drugging protocol in his office files, the photographs, the settlement paperwork. I took it to the SEC, the FBI, the Massachusetts Attorney General. His voice stayed absolutely level. Vernon had connections at every level. They buried the investigation. Then they buried me. Falsified records showing I'd been embezzling. Criminal charges that forced a plea deal. Professional destruction so complete I couldn't get a job managing a convenience store. So you've been gathering evidence ever since. For 15 years. Waiting for the right person, the right moment. He looked at my laptop screen where the final file transfer was completing. You did it. You got the footage, the financial records, the victim testimonies. Everything I couldn't get alone. I stood in that climate-controlled server room looking at Preston Blanchard, his hollow eyes, his worn blazer, the visitor badge he'd probably forged to get inside, and understood what 15 years of obsessive patience looked like. He hadn't been helping me out of altruism. He'd been using me as the weapon he couldn't be himself. I didn't have time to process what Preston's 15-year obsession meant for my own safety. Because 10 days after the FBI raid, Thane's lawyers called to schedule the final divorce proceedings. The divorce papers hit the glass conference table with barely a sound, but I felt the impact like a thunderclap. Thane sat across from me in the law office conference room, flanked by two attorneys in suits that cost more than my monthly salary. He looked tired, beaten down, cooperative. The man who'd staged his own death now signed divorce documents without a single objection. The Eleanor Trust transfer went through smoothly, his lawyer said, sliding a second folder toward me. All assets have been transferred per the separation agreement. Mrs. Whitfield, you'll need to sign acknowledgement of receipt. I looked at my own lawyer, a competent woman named Sarah Chen, who'd been handling the divorce since the FBI raid. She gave me a subtle headshake and asked for a moment to review the documents. We stepped into the hallway. The Eleanor Trust, she said quietly, her expression somewhere between apologetic and furious. It was established by Thane's grandmother in 1987 with a specific reversion clause I didn't catch in the initial filings. If the marriage ends before the 5-year anniversary, all trust assets automatically return to the Whitfield family estate. I stared at her. We've been married 3 years. 3 years and 2 months. Which means legally you receive nothing from the trust. Your marital debts are cleared as agreed, but the asset transfer you negotiated. She shook her head. It reverts, automatically. It was already programmed into the trust structure. Thane had given up the assets because he knew they'd come back to him. The entire negotiation had been theater. I signed the papers with hands that didn't shake because I refused to give him the satisfaction. Back at the hotel room, I sat on the edge of the bed for 20 minutes, letting rage cycle through my system until it crystallized into something colder and more useful. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the evidence drive Preston had given me. Systematic review. That's what auditors do. We don't rage spiral. We document. The files were meticulously organized. Shell companies, falsified audit reports, offshore account transfers. Each one tagged with a client name and date range. I started clicking through and a pattern emerged. 6 different businesses, all small family operations, all between 2019 and 2023. Harrison Family Farm, Vermont. Audit completed March 2019. FBI investigation August 2019. Bankruptcy December 2019. Carter Printing Services, Maine. Audit completed July 2020. FBI investigation November 2020. Bankruptcy March 2021. The pattern repeated 6 times. Trusted family auditor brings in consultant. Consultant finds discrepancies, FBI investigates, business collapses, family destroyed. I pulled up public records cross-referencing each business against bankruptcy filings and divorce proceedings. Harrison Farm. 3rd-generation operation, 847 acres, lost to foreclosure. Divorce finalized same month as bankruptcy. Wife took the children and disappeared. Carter Printing. 40-year business, 23 employees. Owner's marriage ended 2 months after the bankruptcy filing. Every single case followed the identical architecture. Thane hadn't just done this to me. He'd perfected the pattern over 4 years, destroying 6 families before mine. I was victim number 7. My phone buzzed, unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Then something instinct paranoia, the auditor's compulsion to document everything, made me pick up. Hello? Silence. Then Thane's voice, calm and conversational. You should call your parents. Click. My heart stopped. I immediately dialed my mother's cell, straight to voicemail. I tried my father, Lyle Whitfield, the man who'd walked me down the aisle 3 years ago, who'd never trusted Thane but stayed silent because I seemed happy. No answer. Panic rising, I opened the home security app my father had insisted on installing last year after a neighborhood break-in. The camera feed loaded slowly, showing their front porch in afternoon sunlight. A fresh bouquet of white daisies sat on the welcome mat, my mother's favorite flower. The same flowers Thane had sent me every anniversary. Nobody was home. Both the cars were gone from the driveway, but someone had been there. Recently. My phone buzzed again. Text from the same unknown number. A photo my parents' silver Honda in a grocery store parking lot. The timestamp read 3:49 p.m. 2 minutes ago. I tried calling Preston. Voicemail. Texted emergency, Thane threatening my parents. No response. Called my mother again. This time she answered cheerful and oblivious. Hi, honey, we're just finishing up at the grocery store. What's wrong? You sound panicked. Mom, are you okay? Is Dad with you? Of course, he's loading the car. Why? When you get home, check the front porch. Are there flowers on the welcome mat? A pause. Flowers? What are you talking about? I pulled up the security camera feed again, rewinding to earlier footage. They're 3:47 p.m. A figure in a dark coat and baseball cap walks up the front path carrying the white daisies, sets them on the mat, walks away. Face never visible, angled away from the camera with professional precision. 3:51 p.m. The same figure returns, picks up the daisies, walks away as casually as if retrieving a newspaper. 4 minutes. The flowers had been there for exactly 4 minutes, just long enough for me to see them, just long enough to understand the message. My phone buzzed. Final text from the unknown number. You can't protect everyone, but I can reach anyone. I stared at the message until the screen went dark. He hadn't just stolen my business, my marriage, my money. He'd stolen something worse, the illusion that there was anywhere I could go, anyone I could protect, any corner of my life he couldn't reach. Preston had given me a weapon, but Thane had just shown me there was nowhere left to stand where I could safely fire it. 2 days later, I found the place to stand and discovered that some weapons only work if you're willing to risk everything, including the people pointing them at you. The yellow halogen lights of Harbor Island Pier threw long shadows across the water, and somewhere in those shadows, Bryce Riddle was making his last stand. The anonymous text had arrived at 10:17 p.m. Bryce Riddle, East Boston Waterfront, Pier 7, bring FBI. No signature, but I recognized the pattern, short, precise, actionable, Preston style. I called Simone immediately. Bryce Riddle escaped federal custody 2 hours ago, she confirmed, her voice tight. How did you never mind? Where? East Boston Waterfront, Pier 7. Leora, if this is accurate, he's desperate, which makes him dangerous. He's also the only person who can prove where Thane hid the money, I said. The offshore accounts, the shell companies, Bryce executed all of it. He has the access codes, the transaction records, everything. A pause, then, we'll be there in 15 minutes. You stay in the car, I mean it this time. I didn't stay in the car. By 10:47 p.m. I was crouched behind a rusted shipping container 50 feet from an abandoned warehouse, watching FBI tactical units move into position around the pier. Simone had tried to make me wait at the perimeter. I'd followed anyway. Through a grimy warehouse window, I could see 2 figures illuminated by a single work light, Bryce Riddle and Thane Whitfield. Bryce looked exactly like he had at that family dinner 3 weeks ago, buzz-cut, calculating eyes. But now those eyes were wild with desperation. Thane stood with his hands loose at his sides, calm despite the gun Bryce was gesturing with. You owe me. Bryce's voice carried through the broken window. I did the offshore transfers. I falsified the audit trails. I destroyed 6 families for you, and now the FBI has my name on everything. You were paid, Thane said, his tone reasonable, almost bored. Handsomely. $200,000 for the Harrison job alone. This is extortion, Bryce. Call it whatever you want. I want $200,000 cash, or I tell the FBI everything. Account numbers, passwords, shell company structures, all of it. So Bryce had been Thane's technical operator, the man who'd moved the money while Thane destroyed the marriages. Red laser sights appeared on Bryce's chest like bullet holes that hadn't happened yet. He saw them, looked down, realized he was surrounded. You brought them here. Bryce spun toward Thane, panic replacing calculation. You set me up. I didn't bring anyone. Thane raised his hands, slowly stepping back. But you're a fugitive, Bryce. This was inevitable. Bryce pulled a gun from his jacket, a small caliber pistol that shook in his hand. Simone's voice boomed through a megaphone. Bryce Riddle, drop the weapon. You're surrounded. There's no escape. I should have stayed behind the shipping container. Should have let the FBI handle it. Should have followed at least one piece of advice someone had given me in the past 3 months. Instead, I stepped into the warehouse doorway, hands raised, visible. Bryce, I called out. Put the gun down. You can still walk away from this. His eyes locked on me, recognition, then rage. You're why I'm here, you and your fucking investigation. The FBI already has the evidence, I said, keeping my voice steady. Celeste gave them the hard drive. Preston gave them the victim files. Shooting anyone just adds murder to your charges. Nobody walks away. He swung the gun toward me. Time fractured into individual frames. Bryce's finger on the trigger. Thane moving in my peripheral vision. The sound of the gunshot louder than I expected, sharper. Thane's body between me and the bullet. He went down hard, his left shoulder blooming red through his shirt. The impact spun him and he collapsed against a wooden crate with a sound that pushed all the air from my lungs. FBI tactical units swarmed through every entrance. Bryce went down under 3 agents, the gun clattering away across concrete. I was on my knees beside Thane before I'd decided to move. My hands pressed my jacket against his shoulder, blood soaking through the fabric, warm and immediate. His blood was warm through my jacket, the same temperature as trust. Why? The word came out raw. Why would you? I know this won't change anything. His voice was strained, face pale in the harsh work light. His eyes locked on mine with an intensity that felt like drowning. Between us, what I did, I know. Then why? He didn't answer. Just kept looking at me with those eyes that had lied about love for 3 years, that had calculated every manipulation that now held something I couldn't name. Paramedics arrived, professional and efficient, taking over the pressure on his wound. They loaded him onto a stretcher, started an IV, checked vitals with practiced speed. Simone appeared beside me as they carried Thane toward the ambulance. "He saved your life," she said quietly. "Or he saved his strategy." I looked at my hands, dark with his blood. If I die, he loses his leverage, loses the divorce settlement, loses any chance at negotiating his sentence. This could be pure calculation. You really believe that? I watched the ambulance lights fade into the November fog, Thane's blood drying dark on my hands. He'd stepped in front of a bullet. He'd said it wouldn't change anything. But I didn't know anymore if love and tactics had ever been different things for him, or if that distinction had ever mattered at all. 1 week in a hospital under FBI guard gave him plenty of time to plan his next move. I just didn't realize that move would end with him at the bottom of a cliff, or that even death would be another performance. The text from Thane arrived at dawn, Montauk Point noon, come alone. And I knew this was the end of something, even if I didn't know what. I should have called Simone immediately, should have forwarded the text to Preston, should have done literally anything except what I did, which was get in my car at 9 a.m. and drive 3 hours to the windswept cliffs at the eastern tip of Long Island. The November sky was gray with approaching storm clouds. Wind howled across the promontory, carrying the smell of salt and rain. I parked in the empty lot and walked the path to the overlook. Thane stood 15 feet from the cliff edge, his left arm in a sling from the bullet wound. The wind whipped his hair, pressed his clothes against his frame. He looked thinner than I remembered, pale but somehow more focused, almost serene. I stopped 20 feet back, hand on my phone. "I didn't think you'd come," he said over the wind. "I didn't think you'd recover that fast." Motivation is a hell of a painkiller. He turned to face me fully. "Did you bring the FBI? Should I have? Probably. But you didn't, which tells me you're still trying to understand." Understand what? Whether taking that bullet meant something. He pulled a folded document from his jacket with his good hand. "It didn't. This does." He held it out. I didn't move to take it. "It's a comprehensive liability waiver," he said. "You drop all criminal prosecution against me and my family. You relinquish all claims to marital assets. You agree never to speak publicly about any allegations. And if I sign, I disappear. New identity, new country, you never see me again? And if I don't," his expression didn't change. "Your parents have visitors tomorrow morning. Very early, very permanent." The wind seemed to get colder. "You'd kill them." "I'd make a phone call. Someone else would handle the details." He said it like discussing a business transaction. "I have 15 years of contacts, Leora. People who owe me favors. People who need things from the Whitfield family connections. One call and your parents become a tragic home invasion statistic." I looked at the document fluttering in his hand, then at his eyes, searching for something: remorse, hesitation, humanity. "Found nothing. I'm not signing," I said. He smiled, actually smiled. "I know, I expected that." He pulled a manila envelope from his jacket and tossed it toward me. It landed at my feet. "Open it," he said. I picked it up with hands that wanted to shake. Inside, offshore account statements showing an account in my name. Balance $1.2 million. Transfer date 3 weeks ago before the FBI raid. Below it, a life insurance policy. Beneficiary, Leora Whitfield. Payout $2 million in the event of Thane Whitfield's death. "What is this?" "Your motive," Thane said. "Nicely documented, time-stamped, irrefutable. If I die, especially if I die violently, you're the primary suspect. The wife who stood to gain millions. The woman with means, motive, and opportunity. He'd turned my life into a crime scene before the crime even happened." "You think I didn't know you'd have a failsafe?" I said. "I think you didn't realize how thorough I'd be." He stepped backward closer to the cliff edge. The ocean crashed against rocks 200 feet below. You have a choice now. Sign the waiver and I disappear. The offshore account transfers back to me. The life insurance policy is voided. Your parents are safe. Or don't sign and see what happens. This is insane. This is insurance. Another step backward. Wind tore at his clothes. I learned from Vernon, always have leverage. Always have a way out. Thane, I moved toward him. Don't. He spread his arms, the sling making the gesture lopsided. I'm giving you a gift, the chance to walk away. Most people never get that. By framing me for murder, by making the choice clear, sign and you're free. Don't sign and... He looked over his shoulder at the drop. Well, then he leaned backward and fell. I screamed, lunged forward, reached the edge just in time to see his body hit the rocks below limbs at angles that weren't anatomically possible. The ocean spray mixed with blood. Behind me, sirens. FBI vehicles, 3 of them racing into the parking lot. I collapsed the envelopes, scattering around me legal documents mixing with offshore account statements carried by the wind. Simone was there, suddenly pulling me back from the edge, her voice saying something I couldn't process. 2 hours later, standing in the FBI mobile command center, Simone delivered the news with professional detachment, barely covering her fury. Coast Guard recovered clothing and personal effects. No body. The DNA from the clothing samples doesn't match Thane Whitfield's medical records. My phone rang. Preston. Surveillance cameras at the Montauk Marina, he said without preamble. A speedboat departed 40 minutes before the FBI units arrived. Registered to a Shell LLC traced back to Whitfield Commercial Properties. I'm sending you the footage. The photo loaded on my phone, a figure in dark clothes boarding a speedboat. Face obscured, but the build was wrong. Too tall. Wrong posture. He altered his own medical records, Preston continued. Vernon's hospital account was accessed at 2 a.m. this morning. Classic ghost protocol swapped the DNA samples in the database before the body is examined. How do you fight a ghost who chooses when to die and when to live? So he's out there, I said. New name, new face, and I'm holding $1 million motive for his murder. Exactly as he planned it, Preston said. Thane Whitfield was alive somewhere, wearing a new face, living a new name, while I stood holding the planted evidence that made me his murderer. The bullet he'd taken for me wasn't love, it was the setup. And the war I thought was ending at that cliff edge had just expanded into every corner of the world where he could hide. But while Thane was perfecting his escape, I was learning that some wars aren't won by catching the enemy, they're won by saving the people he left behind. Celeste Whitfield wept over her son's empty casket like it held a body, and I almost felt sorry for her until I remembered she'd raised the man who'd tried to bury me alive. The funeral home was small, deliberately understated. Fewer than 20 mourners. Celeste stood beside the closed mahogany casket in a black dress that probably cost more than my car, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Donovan sat in the front row, staring at his phone every 30 seconds like he was expecting news that wasn't coming. I attended because Simone had advised that my absence would look suspicious. The grieving widow who didn't show up to her husband's funeral, especially when that husband had allegedly jumped off a cliff rather than face her, would raise questions the FBI didn't want raised yet. So I sat in the back row wearing black and watched Celeste perform grief over a casket that held nothing. He loved you, you know, Celeste said to me after the service, her voice trembling. In his own way. I'm sure he did, I said, the words hollow. This never should have happened. Donovan appeared beside his mother, looking older than his 28 years. None of this. I didn't ask what he meant. Didn't ask if he knew Thane was alive. Just nodded and stayed silent the way grieving widows are supposed to. Celeste pulled a small wooden box from her purse. I wanted you to have this. Thane would have wanted you to have closure. Inside his wedding ring, the platinum band I'd chosen 3 years ago. Beneath it, a folded letter with my name written in Thane's distinctive architect's handwriting. He wrote this the night before, Celeste said, pressing the box into my hands. He wanted you to understand. Thank you, this means a lot. It was the easiest lie I'd told all week. Please don't hate him forever, Celeste whispered. I took the box and left. Back at the hotel, I set the wooden box on the desk and stared at it for 5 minutes before opening the RF signal detector Preston had given me 2 weeks ago, a device that looked like a thick pen but scanned for radio frequencies, Bluetooth signals, GPS trackers. I waved it over the box. It pinged. I opened the box carefully, feeling under the velvet lining. There, a 3mm Bluetooth tracker barely larger than a grain of rice embedded in the wood beneath where the ring sat. The tracking chip was smaller than a promise and just as easy to break. The suicide note wasn't closure, it was bait. They wanted me to carry the box, keep it close, track my movements, see if I'd lead them to Preston to evidence to whatever contingency plans Thane thought I had. I left the box on the hotel room shelf and walked away. The next morning, I sat across from Simone in a secure FBI conference room with Preston's meticulously organized evidence spread across the table. 6 files, 6 women, 6 families Thane had systematically destroyed between 2019 and 2023. Margaret Holloway, I said, pointing to the first file. Committed to Riverside Psychiatric Center in 2020 under a contract her family signed while she was sedated. She's still there. Diana Reese, I continued. Locked in a private facility in Ohio, her parents have been searching for her for 3 years. Simone reviewed each file with the focused attention of someone who'd seen too many cases like this. If we can prove the contracts were signed under duress, we can get court orders for release. How long? 72 hours for the injunctions, maybe a week for full processing. She looked up at me. These women, he destroyed them systematically. I know, that's why I'm here. Winning wasn't making him pay, it was making sure nobody else did. Simone pulled out a legal pad and started mapping the operation. We can save 3 immediately, the ones still institutionalized. Margaret Holloway, Diana Reese, and Claire Sutton. Their contracts are recent enough that the signatures can be challenged. And the other 3, 2 have families actively searching. If we can locate them and prove coercion, we can initiate reunification proceedings. She paused. The 6th woman, we haven't found her yet. No current address, no family contact in the database. So we save who we can. We save who we can, Simone agreed. The first extraction happens in 48 hours. Margaret Holloway. We'll need your testimony about Thane's methods, the pattern of drugging and coerced contracts. Can you do that? I need to help. I need to be there when they're freed. Simone studied me for a long moment. This is how we win, she said quietly. Not by catching him, by undoing what he did. She spread out a timeline on the conference table. 72 hours from now, 3 women would walk out of facilities they should never have been in. 2 families would be reunited with daughters they'd thought were lost. It wasn't justice for Thane's escape. It wasn't revenge for what he'd done to me. But it was something. 3 women could walk out of psychiatric prisons in 72 hours. 2 families could get their daughters back. Thane had vanished into a new life, but I'd found something better than revenge, the chance to give his victims what he'd stolen from me, their lives back. The war wasn't over, but I'd just changed which battlefield mattered. 2 weeks later, I learned that the best revenge isn't catching your enemy. It's making sure they can't hurt anyone else while you build something better. The Burlington cabins smelled like pine and possibility, and for the first time in months, I woke up without checking the locks twice. Small victories. I'd slept 6 hours without nightmares. I'd made coffee without jumping at every sound. I'd unpacked 3 of the 12 cardboard boxes stacked against the living room wall. The cabin was modest, 800 square feet, 1 bedroom, a wood stove that actually worked. I'd rented it under a Shell LLC. Preston helped me set up, paying 6 months in advance with money from my audit firm Severance. Vermont in late November was cold and quiet and exactly what I needed. 2 weeks since the rescue operations. 3 women freed from psychiatric facilities where they should never have been. 2 families reunited with daughters they'd thought were lost forever. Small wins, Preston called them in his morning emails. I called them proof that some things could still be fixed. I sat at the small kitchen table with my laptop and coffee, coordinating remotely with the FBI's victim support team. Simone had forwarded updates. Margaret Holloway was in transitional housing in Oregon, working with a therapist specializing in institutional trauma. Diana Reese had moved back in with her parents in Ohio, cautiously rebuilding trust after 3 years of coerced separation. Preston's email arrived at 8:47 a.m. All 3 released women adjusting well, families in counseling together. You did this, P. I thought about Thane out there somewhere, new face, new name, living a life I'd never find. The obsession to hunt him had faded into something quieter. Purpose instead of revenge. The doorbell rang like a gunshot in the silence. I froze. Nobody knew I was here except Preston, Simone, and my parents. The cabin sat on 3 acres of wooded land half a mile from the nearest neighbor. Doorbells didn't ring by accident. I grabbed the RF detector from my desk drawer and approached the front door carefully. Through the window, a rural mail carrier climbing back into his truck already driving away. A package sat on the porch. Brown cardboard, no return address postmarked from Boston. I scanned it with the detector. Clean, no electronic signatures. Inside the cabin, I opened it on the kitchen table with hands that remembered how to stay steady. A packet of white daisy seeds in a clear cellophane bag. An antique ring, black onyx set in silver ornate Victorian design, unmistakably expensive. A folded note in handwriting I would recognize anywhere. I opened the note first. The game has only just begun. Plant the seeds, remember what we had, tea. The ring sat heavy in my palm. I recognized it from family photos Celeste had shown me during our first year of marriage. Eleanor Whitfield's onyx ring, passed down through 3 generations of Whitfield women. Celeste had mentioned it was lost. After Thane's funeral, a family heirloom worth at least $40,000 disappeared in the chaos. Not lost, taken, by Thane before his staged death. And now he'd sent it to me in rural Vermont at an address I'd hidden behind corporate shells and false trails. He knew where I was. He was watching. The white daisies were his signature, the flowers he'd sent me every anniversary, the ones that had appeared on my parents' porch as a threat. Plant the seeds, remember what we had. A promise that this wasn't over, that he could reach me whenever he wanted. That despite everything, the FBI, the evidence, the faked death, he still held power over my life. I set the ring on the table, didn't put it on, didn't throw it away, just set it down next to the packet of daisy seeds. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up a file I'd created 3 days ago, Interpol_testimony_final.pdf. 217 pages. Every offshore account Preston had traced, every shell company structure, every falsified audit trail, every victim's testimony, every piece of evidence Celeste's hard drive had contained, every connection between Vernon Thane Bryce and 15 years of financial crimes spanning 3 countries. I'd sent it to Interpol Financial Crimes on November 18th, 3 days before Thane's package arrived. Encrypted transmission with authentication codes that proved every document's chain of custody. The kind of evidence package that triggered immediate account freezes and international cooperation protocols. He'd sent me seeds to plant, not knowing I'd already scorched his earth. I pulled up my email sent folder and reread the delivery confirmation from Interpol. Then I opened the tracking dashboard Preston had built to monitor Thane's known accounts. 4 of them showed status changes in the past 48 hours, under investigation assets frozen. Thane thought he was opening a new round, fresh threats, old symbols, the game beginning again. But 3 days ago, I'd sent encrypted files to Interpol Financial Crimes, every offshore account, every shell company, every falsified record Preston had compiled. The daisy seeds sat on my table like a taunt from a ghost who didn't know he was already buried. He'd find out soon enough. The daisy seeds still sat on my kitchen table 3 days later, a monument to Thane's ignorance. He thought he was sending a threat. He didn't know the bomb had already detonated. I was in my Burlington cabin's makeshift office when Preston's encrypted message arrived. Gomez confirmed. Records ready for extraction. 5 years, every prescription. Dr. Conrad Gomez had been Eleanor's internist for a decade. I'd never met him during my marriage. Thane controlled all of Eleanor's medical appointments, but Preston had tracked him through the Medicare billing database. 73 years old, recently retired, and according to his digital footprint, a man who kept meticulous records. I called the number Preston provided. Gomez answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Ashford." His voice was rough, cautious. "Ms. Ashford now," I said. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me. Your associate said this was about Eleanor Ashford's death." A pause. "I've been waiting 5 years for someone to ask the right questions." My pulse quickened. "You suspected something." "I documented everything." The bitterness in his tone was sharp. Thane Whitfield brought his mother in quarterly, always insisted on being present during examinations, always had a list of symptoms she was experiencing: tremors, confusion, gastrointestinal distress. I prescribed medications for Parkinson's, dementia, chronic gastritis. "Medications that made her worse," I said quietly. How many doctors carry the weight of a murder they couldn't prove? Every 3 months, new symptoms. Every 3 months, I adjusted dosages or added new prescriptions. By the end, Eleanor was on 17 different medications. His voice cracked. I requested toxicology screening twice. Thane refused both times, cited his mother's dignity. I should have pushed harder. I should have. You kept records, I interrupted gently. That's what matters now. Gomez sent the files within an hour. 5 years of prescription records annotated with his contemporaneous notes. Patient's son reports worsening tremors inconsistent with previous exam findings. Requested independent neurology consult, family declined. Patient appears more confused when son is present than when alone. The pattern was surgical. Thane had weaponized his mother's doctors, turning their care into the instrument of her death. I forwarded everything to Preston. How long to integrate this into the financial package? 4 hours, he replied. The Cayman account just cracked. You need to see this. The video call showed Preston's face shadows under his eyes from weeks of 18-hour days. Behind him, 6 monitors displayed cascading data. Thane's $43 million account wasn't just hidden, Preston said. It was structured as a shell corporation called Meridian Holdings, with subsidiary accounts in Luxembourg, Singapore, and the Caymans. The money moved in a cycle every 72 hours to avoid detection thresholds. He pulled up a flowchart that looked like a spiderweb. But here's the beautiful part: he got greedy. In 2021, he moved $4.2 million from Meridian into a Swiss account under his own name to purchase a villa in Lucerne. That single transaction links him directly to the shell structure. Can you prove the $43 million came from Eleanor's estate? Better. Preston's smile was grim. I can prove $39.8 million of it matches exact wire transfers from the Eleanor Ashford Trust between September 2018 and March 2022. The remaining $3.2 million came from liquidating her art collection. I have the auction house records. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the pieces lock into place like tumblers in a vault. Send me everything. We're finishing this tonight. We spent the next 6 hours building the forensic audit. Preston handled the financial architecture, every account, every transaction, every shell company traced back to its source. I integrated Gomez's medical records, Celeste's testimony about Thane's abuse, Vernon's documentation of the embezzlement, and Simone's evidence of witness intimidation. The final document was 47 pages. Page 1. Executive summary of Thane Whitfield's systematic financial fraud, elder abuse, and suspected homicide. Pages 2 through 12. Timeline of Eleanor's medical decline cross-referenced with prescription records and Thane's financial activities. Pages 13 through 31. Complete mapping of the $43 million in stolen assets with wire transfer receipts, shell company registrations, and bank statements. Pages 32 through 42. Documentation of Thane's retaliation campaign. The 6 victims he'd systematically destroyed, the manufactured lawsuits, the reputation sabotage. Pages 43 through 47. Evidentiary attachments. Gomez's medical records. Celeste's notarized statement, the Interpol case file I'd been building for 3 months. Can a single document destroy a man who thought himself untouchable? I read through it 3 times, checking every citation, every date, every dollar amount. This wasn't just evidence. This was a prosecution blueprint, a roadmap for federal agents who would spend the next year building their case. At 8:47 p.m. on December 14th, I sent the 47-page audit to 3 recipients: FBI Assistant Director Marcus Chen, Interpol Financial Crimes Unit Chief Adriana Koss, and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. The subject line read, Urgent Evidence of Elder Abuse, Financial Fraud, and Suspected Homicide, Eleanor Ashford Case. I attached Gomez's records, Preston's financial analysis, and a cover letter I'd written in my own hand. My name is Leora Whitfield. For 18 months I was married to Thane Whitfield. For 6 years I was complicit in his crimes through silence and fear. I am no longer silent. The attached evidence documents systematic elder abuse, the theft of $43 million from Eleanor Ashford's estate, and credible evidence of deliberate poisoning leading to her death. I am prepared to testify, to provide additional documentation, and to cooperate fully with any investigation. Thane Whitfield spent 5 years murdering his mother. He spent 6 more years destroying anyone who threatened to expose him. This ends now. I hit send. Then I poured myself 2 fingers of bourbon, walked to the cabin's window, and watched snow begin to fall over Lake Champlain. My phone buzzed 90 minutes later. Preston's message was brief. FBI just requested emergency asset freezes on all accounts in the audit. Federal prosecutors opening formal investigation. They're moving tonight. I raised my glass to the darkness outside. Thane had sent me daisy seeds as a threat, not knowing that while he'd been playing games, I'd built a noose from his own crimes and handed it to the federal government. By morning, his $43 million would be frozen. By next week, his empire would be ash. The federal courtroom's white lights made everyone look like ghosts, but Celeste Whitfield stood in the defendant's box like she'd finally found solid ground. 2 weeks had passed since I'd sent the 47-page audit to the FBI. 2 weeks since Thane's accounts had frozen. 2 weeks since federal prosecutors had opened formal investigations into elder abuse, financial fraud, and suspected homicide. Celeste's preliminary hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Wednesday in mid-December. I sat 3 rows back, flanked by strangers in wool coats who smelled of coffee and winter rain. Simone Ramsey sat 2 rows ahead, her FBI credentials clipped to her belt, a reminder that this was work for her and survival for me. Judge Margaret Sokoloff entered, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and reading glasses on a chain. The bailiff, a broad-shouldered man named Harris, called the court to order. Celeste stood when instructed. She wore a navy blazer and white blouse, no jewelry except her wedding band. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. For the first time since I'd known her, she wasn't performing grief or fragility or wounded innocence. She was just standing there, straight-backed and quiet. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney David Brennan, read the charges accessory after the fact to financial crimes, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice. Each count carried a maximum of 5 years. How does the defendant plead? Judge Sokolov's voice was neutral, precise. Celeste didn't hesitate. Guilty, Your Honor. No tears, no trembling voice, no performance. Brennan outlined the plea agreement: full cooperation with the ongoing investigation into Thane Whitfield's activities, forfeiture of any assets derived from Eleanor Ashford's estate, supervised release pending sentencing. In exchange, the prosecution would recommend concurrent sentences with credit for cooperation. The defendant has provided substantial assistance in identifying offshore accounts and documenting Mr. Whitfield's financial activities, Brennan said. The prosecution recommends supervised release pending sentencing. Judge Sokolov granted bail, $50,000 bond, electronic monitoring, travel restrictions to Massachusetts and Vermont only. The hearing lasted 17 minutes. As the bailiff moved to escort Celeste from the courtroom, she walked down the center aisle. Her path took her within 6 feet of where I sat. Our eyes met. She nodded once. Not apology, not defiance, just acknowledgement. I nodded back. There was nothing to say. We'd both loved a monster, just in different ways, and that was all the common ground we'd ever have. Simone turned in her seat, caught my eye, gave me a small professional nod. Then she stood and left through the prosecution's exit. I sat alone in the courtroom for another 5 minutes, listening to the sound of my own breathing. 1 month later, I was at my Burlington cabin watching December sunset turn Lake Champlain to copper and gold. I'd settled into something that resembled routine consulting work for 3 small nonprofits, twice weekly therapy sessions, via video call, daily walks along the frozen shoreline. The cabin was warm. The work was mine. The doors locked from the inside. My laptop chimed at 6:15 p.m. Encrypted email from Simone Ramsey. Subject line: Victim Recovery Update. My heart kicked against my ribs. I opened it slowly, the way you open doors in houses, where you've learned not to trust what's on the other side. The email was brief, clinical, perfect. Federal investigation has resulted in release of 3 women from psychiatric facilities. Contracts voided based on evidence of coercion and fraudulent commitment proceedings. Current status: Margaret Holloway released December 8th, reunited with sister in Portland, Oregon, receiving outpatient therapy. Diana Reese released December 12th, reunited with parents in Columbus, Ohio, enrolled in trauma recovery program. Claire Sutton released December 15th, placed in transitional housing in Boston, progressing well, medication reduced by half. 3 additional victims being located by FBI field offices. We'll update as information becomes available. Your cooperation made this possible. SR. I read each name twice. Margaret, Diana, Claire. 3 women who'd been locked away because they'd threatened Thane's control. 3 women who'd spent years in facilities they didn't need medicated into compliance, their voices dismissed as delusion or instability. 3 women who were home now or learning what home could mean after years of institutional fluorescent lights and locked doors. Margaret was with her sister in Oregon. Diana was with her parents in Ohio. Claire was in Boston sleeping without sedatives for the first time in years. 2 women could breathe without looking over their shoulders. 2 women could trust that the doors they locked would keep them safe. I closed the laptop and stood. The white daisy seeds. Thane had sent his threat, his taunt, his reminder that he could always find me. Still sat on the kitchen shelf where I'd left them a month ago. I'd kept them as evidence of his arrogance, proof that he'd underestimated me, even as his empire crumbled. I picked up the packet, walked outside into the December cold. The garden plot behind the cabin was small, 6 feet by 4 feet, outlined in river stones I'd placed myself. The earth was frozen at the surface, but I'd prepared it weeks ago, turned the soil, added compost, covered it with mulch. I stood at the edge of the plot and opened the packet of daisy seeds. Then I walked to the trash bin and emptied them inside. His seeds, his threat, his assumption that I would plant what he'd chosen. From my coat pocket, I pulled a different packet, wildflower seeds I'd bought from a local nursery the week before. Purple coneflower, black-eyed Susan, wild bergamot. Seeds I'd chosen. I knelt in the cold December dirt, pulled back the mulch, and pressed the seeds into the earth with my bare hands. The soil was dark and rich and smelled of possibility. His seeds went in the trash, mine went in the ground. I covered them gently, patted the earth smooth, replaced the mulch. Then I stood, brushed the dirt from my palms, and looked out at the lake. Margaret was home in Oregon. Diana was home in Ohio. Claire was learning to sleep without sedatives. 2 women could breathe completely. 2 women didn't have to be afraid anymore. I knelt in cold December dirt and planted seeds I'd chosen myself, and for the first time since I'd met Thane Whitfield, I wasn't afraid of what would grow. 3 weeks after planting my first garden, the lavender seeds hadn't sprouted yet, but I was learning that some kinds of growth happen underground where no one can see them. The Burlington garden was small, 6 feet by 4 feet, bordered in river stones I'd carried up from the lakeshore one by one. Lavender, rosemary, chamomile. No white daisies. Never again. I knelt in the December cold each morning, checking the dark soil for signs of life, knowing that patience was its own kind of power. I no longer dreamed of locked rooms. My laptop sat open on the porch table, 3 encrypted FBI channels, monitored alerts, configured for specific transaction patterns. This wasn't passive peace. This was active waiting. The trap was set. I was patient. The morning routine had become ritual: coffee at 7, therapy video call at 8:30 with Dr. Sarah Michaels, who specialized in financial abuse trauma consulting work, from 9 to noon for small businesses recovering from fraud. I helped people read balance sheets the way forensic auditors did, looking for the numbers that didn't belong, the patterns that revealed theft. Preston emailed every Wednesday with updates on the frozen accounts. The federal case was moving through the system with the slow precision of bureaucracy. Interpol had flagged Thane's known aliases across 43 countries. His empire was dismantled, but the man himself remained a ghost. My parents called every Sunday now. With Thane's network destroyed, they were safer. My mother talked about her garden in Phoenix, citrus trees and desert roses. My father asked if I needed anything, his voice careful, like he was learning how to talk to a daughter he'd almost lost. I told them I was fine. For the first time in years, it wasn't a lie. I'd built something real from the wreckage. At 11:30 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number, Massachusetts area code. "This is Arthur Pemberton," the voice said. "I'm handling the final settlement of Eleanor Ashford's estate. Is this a good time?" Arthur Pemberton was 71, senior partner at Pemberton and Associates, the firm that had managed Eleanor's trust for 30 years. I'd spoken with him twice before, once during the investigation, once during Thane's conviction proceedings. "Yes," I said, "go ahead." "I saw the notice," I said. Pemberton cleared his throat. "There's a provision in Eleanor's Trust Clause 7.3b that addresses beneficiary conduct." Specifically, it states that any heir convicted of a felony related to the estate or its administration is immediately disqualified from inheritance. All assets in that scenario revert to the designated charitable remainder. I sat very still, which is the National Financial Fraud Victim Recovery Fund. Eleanor established it in 2018 after reading about elder abuse cases. The entire estate, all remaining assets will be liquidated and transferred to victim assistance programs. How much? I asked, though I already knew. $43 million, Pemberton said, give or take legal fees. I closed my eyes, felt something that might have been laughter or tears or both building in my chest. Mr. Donovan Whitfield has been informed, Pemberton continued. He was listed as alternate beneficiary in the event of Thane's disqualification. However, Clause 7.3b supersedes all other provisions. The estate goes directly to charity. So Donovan gets nothing. Not a dollar. Clause 7.3b is ironclad. Eleanor was quite specific. I thanked him and ended the call. Then I sat on the porch and laughed until my ribs ached. Donovan had saved me to save his inheritance, had warned me about Thane's surveillance, had helped me escape, all while calculating his future payout when his cousin's crimes inevitably caught up to him. He'd been kind because kindness served his interests, and now there was nothing left to inherit but consequences. Eleanor's trust would help thousands of people rebuild after financial predators destroyed their lives. The money Thane had stolen would fund recovery programs, legal assistance therapy for victims who'd lost everything. It was the most perfect justice I could imagine. At 3:45 p.m., an encrypted email arrived from FBI Financial Crimes, routed through Simone Ramsey's secure channel. Subject line, Transaction Flag Priority Alert. I opened it. Single transaction logged 1422, Greenwich Mean Time from dormant account, linked to Meridian Holdings shell structure. Amount, $8,200 US. Origin, Cayman Islands. International Bank Account Number, 47-882-CXL. Destination European Routing Numbers suggest Geneva, Switzerland. Account holder used secondary authentication protocol established 2023. Interpol notified. Tracking in progress. SR. I read it 3 times. $8,200. A small amount easy to miss in the noise of global banking. But Thane's frozen accounts held $43 million. This transaction came from somewhere else, a backup reserve, a hidden cache he'd kept off the primary books. He was alive, he was accessing emergency funds, and every access left a digital footprint. The trap was working. I typed a brief reply, I see it, continue monitoring. Then I stood and walked to the window. The garden lay in late afternoon shadows, dark soil, and promised no flowers yet. Just roots growing where I couldn't see them, building the foundation for something that would bloom in spring. I returned to my laptop and opened the tracking spreadsheet I'd built 3 months ago. Columns for dates, amounts, routing numbers, account identifiers, geographic patterns. Every piece of data Simone sent me went into this sheet. Every transaction Thane made, thinking he was invisible, became another data point in the web I was weaving. The lavender hadn't bloomed yet, but neither had Thane's last mistake. He was out there somewhere new. Face, new name, new documents purchased from the same networks that had once served his empire. He thought he'd escaped, but he'd built his life on money, and money required movement. Transfers, withdrawals, transactions. And every transaction left a number. I saved the spreadsheet, backed it up to 3 encrypted servers, and closed the laptop. The sun was setting over Lake Champlain, turning the water to copper and shadow. My garden was still and quiet. The cabin was warm, the doors locked from the inside, and I held all the keys. I looked at the dark soil one more time. The lavender seeds were still underground, building roots in the dark where growth happens slowly and strong. Thane Whitfield was still out there, living under a name I didn't know, wearing a face I wouldn't recognize. But eventually he'd need money. And when he did, he'd leave a number, a transaction, a trail. I was no longer the hunted. I was the auditor. And every number, no matter how well hidden, must eventually appear in the spreadsheet. The painful past stands still behind me, giving way to a life of complete freedom where every single next step of my own journey is entirely decided and mastered by myself. And to you listening to my story, remember this: silence protects the guilty, not the innocent. I spent 6 years staying quiet because I thought keeping the peace was the same as keeping myself safe. I told myself that looking away from the numbers that didn't add up, from Eleanor's mysterious decline, from Thane's need to control everything, I told myself that was loyalty. It wasn't. It was complicity. Don't make my mistake. Don't confuse silence with safety. If something doesn't add up, whether it's numbers in a bank account or the story someone tells about why their mother keeps getting worse, trust that instinct. Your unease is information. The truth waits in the details and the patterns in the spreadsheets that don't balance. I believe God gave me the skills to see those patterns for a reason, and when I finally used them, everything changed. Sometimes the only way out is through the very thing you're afraid to look at. The evidence was always there. I just had to be brave enough to see it. I'd love to know what you think about this story. Would you have seen the signs earlier? What would you have done differently? Drop a comment below and let me know. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Her Drama Stories for more stories like this one. Thank you for staying until the very end. As a reminder, some elements of this story have been fictionalized for narrative and reflection purposes. What matters most is the message and the lesson we can take from it.